Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying your Friday. Here's on this episode, we're going to be talking with the amazing Kristan Vermeulen, and we're going to be talking about her business in PR and how so many of our different businesses was affected due to COVID. And I myself, my industry was definitely affected, the fashion industry, and I know so many of you other guys out here that's listening, you guys had, some type of effect or impact from COVID. So I'm going to throw it over to Kristen, and she is going to give you guys a brief introduction to who she is and how COVID affected her.
Well,
Kristen,
thank you so
I'm
much,
so
Tanya,
sorry.
for having me on today. Jeez, I'm just so honored. So a little bit about myself. So I am based out of a little town, Cumberland, Maine. It's close to Portland. And I came up here about a couple years ago. My husband is originally from Maine, so he's happy to be back in his home state.
Aww.
And yeah, it's so lovely. And we have 2 children and a dog, so we've definitely grown our family since we've been here over the couple years. And this just state has been remarkable. I'm originally from Maryland, the hustle and bustle of Maryland I was getting sick of, so I wanted to slow down a little bit, go to Maine, and get to know the lifestyle and culture here, and really to get to know my husband's side of the family, because I don't really get to spend much time with them as they live up here in New England. And so I wanted to kind of see what I could do work-wise. I actually studied marketing and public relations and got a job with a company called Sea Bags, which they make handbags and accessories out of recycled sailcloth, which is truly remarkable when I first found out about this company. And so I worked with them for a little while, and then I got pregnant with my first, and I was like, I don't know if I want to be working full-time anymore for a company. And the president there was like, well, why don't you just try considering going the freelance route and doing PR for multiple clients? So I did. And that's when my public relations firm had started. It's called Nautical PR. It's Knotical, confusing spelling. But that's what I really wanted to do. And so as I got to really do a deep dive into the clientele I wanted to support, I found that the small business industry here in Maine is quite just amazing. So according to the Small Business Administration, there's over 99.2% of Maine businesses are small. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Like, you never see that percentage in Maryland.
Right.
So I decided to focus on them and support their public relations efforts and getting them on national, publications and media outlets, to local, television and media outlets. And so yeah, it kind of grew from there. And, it's been fabulous to support these small businesses. And, but yes, and then COVID hit and kind of went downhill for me, because that's what I'm about. I'm all about supporting small businesses.
Right. And it's so crazy because they were the ones that were hit the hardest. Even though a lot of big businesses, they took a fall, which was a little surprising to me, but a lot of the small businesses really took a hit. I noticed that in my neighborhoods after finally being able to come out of quarantine, walking down the street and seeing so many businesses close. And it was just so sad to see that these, businesses, these mom and pop small businesses were closed down, that they didn't survive. So I can only imagine, like, yikes, like how that.
Yeah. And I would say it's like a little back and forth up here. It's either that people are hanging on by a thread, or some, have been quite successful. I think a lot of people here in New England, and especially in Maine, appreciate small businesses and understand that we're in a really crazy time. So people, go and buy gift cards just to keep the businesses afloat, or, go and buy their products, or whatever they can do to support them. I think that's what our community is really all about, and I'm so grateful to be a part of that community. So I feel like I'm definitely seeing a balance, but definitely more on the lines of a lot of them are going through lots of challenges. So it doesn't surprise me that you're seeing that down your way as well.
Yeah, but you know what? It was interesting because it made me more aware of how much the small businesses did need our support. So it made me make a point to myself after this whole thing, the businesses that I used to frequent that were always super sweet and nice and personable, to make sure to support them, to make sure to when I first got out of quarantine, the restaurant that was by my house always somehow go buy some food from them, go get a drink from them, or like the other little like the small stores around here, not always run to the big business, but try to put some more money back into the community and back to these small businesses. So it made me more aware, and I hope it made other people more aware. Like, we have to support these businesses that's keeping our neighborhood afloat. One question I had was, what type of businesses do you guys mainly have there in the area?
We have a wide range.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So we have, Maine is known for its tourist attractions, restaurants, but a piece to that that I think a lot of people don't know about are the makers. So that's truly what I focus on when it comes to my public relations firm. So these makers consist of potters, artists, blacksmiths, cut and sew, photographers, musicians. There's definitely just such a broad, just really categories of these makers. And I really wanted to get into this because not only do they have such lovely pieces, but they also have some fabulous stories. And to go and voice that out to the public, that's even outside of Maine, like it shows a lot. It really, Made in Maine is a brand that people will get to know when they come to Maine. It's just an experience that people will never forget. So that's kind of the type of businesses that you would ultimately see if you're walking down like a small downtown. You'll see a variety of makers that tell a story.
I love that, because that is true. When we think of places that, that's making things, Maine does not pop into your head. Like, I was actually having a conversation with a friend earlier today, and she mentioned Maine was on her list of one of the places to visit. And I said, that's so strange, because I'm about to speak to someone who's from Maine, and she was like, oh yeah, it's beautiful. And she brought something to my attention that I felt so stupid afterwards. She said, yeah, Maine lobster. I'm like, oh, goofball, yeah, Maine lobster. It did not even resonate to me that I never put the two together.
Yeah. The lobster's fantastic there. You have to come up sometime.
I do. I was like, now I'm really interested. I really want to go, and I love seafood. But that's true. Like, and it's so amazing that people, these small businesses have a person like you who's putting their names out there and getting it known that these makers are there. Like, you wouldn't think, Maine, but it is out there. Like, there's places there that people are making things, and I'm glad that you are giving them a platform. So I also wanted to ask you, because I know that you not only were your business was a little bit affected during COVID, but you also was having another life-changing event right prior to COVID, which was having your son Crew. And could you talk to us a little bit about that, like that whole transition of about to having the baby, and now this big crisis hit? Like, can you just tell us that story and your mental state at that time?
Oh yeah, yes. So in February, my son was born late February, and I had no idea this was going on. I think I was more focused on walking around trying to get this baby out because I was so big. This little boy was a 10-pound, 5-ounce kid.
Guys, he is so adorable. He's so adorable. And it's so funny. I said, he's so chunky. And then I seen you said, my chunky boy. I'm like, oh, yes, he's such a chunky little baby.
Oh, yeah. He is. Oh, my goodness. And when I had him, my daughter was going to daycare at the time, and then my husband was like, I think we got to keep the kids home because there's just this chaos happening right now. We have no idea what this virus is going to do. And literally, I think it was the day that my daughter, we pulled her out of daycare, she winds up getting sick. And I'm like, what is going on? And she starts getting a rash on her mouth. She gets fever. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is up? And of course, like as a parent, especially like with a virus that's so unknown, that's the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh my goodness, she probably has it. And thank goodness she didn't. She had hand, foot, mouth, which is even like, that's really bad too. But yeah, like I was so scared. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going through, trying to keep my business afloat because when I saw everything hit, I was taking some time off anyways to be with my son. But I was like, what's going to happen when I come back? I'm like, I think half these businesses are not going to be my clients anymore because I'm just seeing everything fall apart. And, it kind of put me through this sort of depression. And, besides that, like, after having, a baby, some women do go through postpartum depression. I did not go through that with my first. And so I think, that on top of everything else going on in my life with the pandemic, I was like, this is not good. And I had been going through that for, months after, everything was we're going through everything. And, it was so hard. And I think my husband was feeling it too, because, he saw me breaking down and he was kind of breaking down with me because our son didn't sleep very well. It's just, you're going through the motions of being a mom and you thought the second child would be easier. No. Oh my goodness. Like for me, it was not. And it's just a lot of challenges you could go through. So yeah, I would say that, the mental state has gotten better, to now. I would say just due to some things that I've been doing to keep me more positive and just to keep my drive. I mean, thank God for my family and friends who are my support system. So I feel like there's a lot of moms going through this right now, and man, I feel for them. And I don't even know what to tell them half the time because everyone has a different situation.
Right. And that's why I wanted to speak on it too, just in case if there were some moms out there that were listening and, going through this, especially just having a baby during a time like this, or just even if, just dealing with like postpartum or any type of depression, or, basically kind of like how you did with dealing with it, is getting busy and getting, being able to take your mind off of things or whatever. I really feel like sometimes as women, even though I've never had a baby, but I know sometimes as women, we just need to hear someone else's story to know that we're not going crazy. Like I'm not.
Oh, definitely.
I'm not going,
yeah. And plus our hormones are so
I can imagine,
off track when it comes to like, having a baby. And I didn't realize it until going through the process because people talk about it, right? And they're like, oh yeah, this is what to expect. And then you're like, okay, this is actually happening. And I totally get it now. And so I feel for anyone who's going through this position. And I feel as though that a lot of people aren't doing any outreach to get the help that they need. And I'm telling you, please do the outreach because honestly, I am seeing a therapist, my first time, seeing one, and I would say it has helped. And then also exercising every day, at least 20 minutes a day. Like I understand if you've got kids at home and you can't even get 20 minutes in, do it. Try to work out with your kids.
I was just going to say, incorporate them, incorporate the dog, everybody. Right. That's true. I was just getting ready to say that. Incorporate the kids, especially like if you have a dog, go walk the dog. That'll be, getting some stuff going on too. Yeah. So, my next question is, when did the light bulb go off in your head that, you needed to create these resources? Because now you have the, after the COVID situation, you created the Makers of Maine. And when did that light bulb go off in your head to create this podcast, to create this resource for the small businesses or for people who were struggling during this time? Like, what was that journey like?
So at the time, after having my son and everything, and then, getting back to work slowly, because in the life of public relations, you're always working.
Right.
So, yeah, that's just the life of it. But so I would say I only kept one business as my clientele when I went back to work.
Okay.
And they actually had to cut some of my budget. And I was like, man, this is crazy. Like, I never thought that I would be so low in clientele, which was fine because I was like, I could spend more time with my kids. But I'm like, what's going to happen to these businesses that are struggling and like they don't have their retail stores open right now, and like their wholesale orders are pretty much gone because nothing's open. And so I was like, is there a way that I can give back to the community in a way where I can go and voice their stories? That way people can go and get to know them from a digital aspect of it. And yes, there are publications existing here in Maine that do tell that story really through television or through radio or through print and digital publications. But there isn't many that talk about it through podcasts. And I was like, okay, let me just fill this void of really encompassing the stories of these makers, longer form content, authentic conversations, really just hearing about it from their voice. Because I find that some people will go, these editors and journalists will go and edit it to formulate their own kind of idea. And they'll go and chop up a lot of the story that maybe that person didn't explain it in that way. And then they're like, oh man, I didn't really want it to come off that way. But I mean, I guess it was a good article. So I didn't want that. I was like, I want to hear the real deal. Like, tell me about how you became a potter or a woodworker or an axe maker. Tell me how you got to be in this place and what's your experience. So it was really just what's really what kicked it off. And I had some great mentors along the way, including a former anchor of Channel 13 here in Maine, Patsy Wiggins. If it wasn't for her to kind of give me that nudge of like, you need to do this because your PR firm is all about small businesses. And this is a great way to showcase their stories. I mean, why not? So I decided to do it. And so with help from friends, I actually established kind of like an at-home studio. I would literally hide in my closet with my audio equipment and to kind of get away from my kids to record. And and then also establishing, who I'm going to have my podcast, the actual guests. So I actually went and interviewed a lot of my clients because they do have great stories. And, I want to give back to them, whether they're not my clients anymore. I was like, I want to do something just to help them out. But then as I continued just doing that audio piece of the podcast at the beginning, and I had really officially launched the podcast in June, but I was working on it probably in like April, May timeframe because I wanted to make sure I had enough content established. And I was like, I don't know if the podcast audio is enough. I was like, what else can I do to give back to the makers? So I decided to get a network of photographers together, as well as videographers. And I said, hey guys, like I'm starting this project. I really want to showcase your work. How would you like to be a part of photo shoots for my guests on the podcast to talk about their craft and products? So they were like, oh yeah, this is great. So I have like about a handful of photographers, and of course I credit them like crazy. I'm actually even thinking about starting a photographer series as a part of the podcast. So that way I can talk to them about their stories. And so yeah, they go with me to the shoots. We do a socially distanced shoot, and we just get to know the process, get to know the people, and yeah, it's been fabulous. So I think it's just really nice to give back in that way, and all of those assets are given to these makers because those can be pretty expensive if you're going to hire like a professional photographer. So that's been really nice.
It's so true. It's so and that's a lot of where, especially with a small business, because I know myself, my background, I used to do production and with doing creative directing for either brands or businesses. And that is where most of your money comes in, that marketing part.
Right.
Getting it out, getting that imagery together, it can be very costly. And if you don't have the resources or the right people, sometimes that's the part that never gets done. And that can make or break the, be the breaker of the business when you don't have that. So you providing that and, just networking and getting everybody stuff, that's amazing. I love that. That's really great.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So could you share any of the stories that you may have heard that from one of your businesses, or someone who may have been impacted, or even just their journey to becoming a maker?
Sure. So, I can give you a couple of great examples.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll share my favorite. Actually, all of them are my favorite, but one that really stands out and was not my client, I actually learned about them through a colleague of mine, is Brant and Cochran, and they are axe makers, and they're based down in South Portland. And I had no idea, but Maine has a long history of axe making. And in a town in Oakland, which is a small town, and they had about 12 axe makers in that area. And they make Maine pattern axes. And Maine trees are soft woods, so the axe head is a little smaller than, like, you may see some axe heads that are bigger, and they're made for harder trees, or hardwood trees. And so it was really interesting to kind of get to know the education behind that, and to really see what Brant and Cochran is doing. So what they did, because these axe makers no longer exist, what they did is they really studied the history, they studied the patterns, they studied kind of the technology and operations behind it, and they kind of gave Maine back their axes. And so they've been selling them like crazy. And so they actually landed a major wholesale account out west, I believe in Washington State. And they sold a bunch of axes to them. And so that's definitely a success story behind COVID, and how they've pivoted their business from a success standpoint. Now, I would say that more, folks that have some challenges. So, for instance, there's a fashion designer. Her name's Roxy Sugar, and she's based out of Biddeford, Maine. She works out of the Pepperell Mill. And her two apparel collections are Angel Rocks as well as Sugar. And she's got two retail stores, one in Biddeford and one in Portland. And so the biggest challenge was she couldn't open up her retail stores at the peak of the pandemic. And that lost a lot of business for her. When you walk into her retail space, I mean, you get a full-blown experience of what her pieces are about, what her brand's about, what her history is about. And every employee that works for her, they make you feel like a queen. Like, you walk in there and they're like, girl, we got the best dress for you, or the best top for you. Like, we're going to make up your wardrobe with all of Roxy's pieces. And they just throw them in the dressing room, style it, layer it. I mean, that's what it's all about, really just positivity about women image and just like feeling good.
And that experience.
So that was a major challenge, because that sort of lost that in-person connection. And Portland is a very high tourist attraction. A lot of people go to Portland when they think of Maine because of the restaurants and everything. And unfortunately, they didn't have their retail store open. So that was one challenge she had. The other one was wholesale. So Roxy would go to big shows in New York as well as Georgia to showcase her products to potential wholesalers, and she would sell lots of products. She was very successful with that, and she has a whole community of wholesalers, and she's been in business for about 20 years now. And she was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Because I expected to, make this amount of money through wholesale orders. And that's pretty much the majority of where her sales go towards. So I would say those are the two biggest factors. And with her, but I would say that they're doing fairly well. They pivoted in ways that I thought was just unbelievable. So they started making face masks out of plant-based material, because that's what she's all about with her apparel. And these masks are gorgeous, and line and one's higher up on your head, so it like lays very nicely around your face.
Mm-hmm.
And also what they did was they donated a bunch of their masks to the frontline workers, because at the time, as we all know, and not a lot of the frontline workers had enough PPE, the protective gear for the virus and everything, being in their practice. So yeah, that was another one. And the last one I will share is, so I recently did a collaboration with an association here in Maine called Maine Crafts Association. Mm-hmm. And what they do, and they're a nonprofit, and what they do is they support makers across Maine with resources and events of getting their products out there. They're really just about voicing the stories of craftspeople through meaningful ways, through events, and just partnering with the state to do that as well. And they have an event called Maine Crafts Weekend, which is the first weekend of October. Mm-hmm. And typically it is, it's huge. Mm-hmm. People from out of state come, people in state are all about it, and about celebrating craft for a weekend. Mm-hmm. And they actually had a database of all the businesses that were like a part of this event. They had big sponsors. Mm-hmm. And it was just a fabulous event they put together. And so unfortunately, due to COVID, they furloughed a lot of their staff, and they didn't have enough resources to go and really put a good backing for this event to make it like an in-person thing and have a whole database and all of that. So I reached out to them, and I'm just a newbie podcast. I didn't really have much following, and I was like, hey, is there any way we could collaborate? Because I would love to talk about the event. I would love to, get you guys on for an interview and maybe talk to like a handful of your guests, or like really just members that'll be a part of the weekend in some way. Because I think they pulled it back to a smaller scale, but they left it to the makers to make it more of like a DIY event. So it wasn't very formalized. So it's still happening. It's just not as big as it used to be. So I went and did a 5-episode series about the event, like kind of prior to the event. So that way people get to know the makers and stuff and understand the event and be like, oh, I want to experience this, whether it be listening to this podcast or going out in person to see some of these makers in a social distance setting. So that's another thing, that really highlights kind of how they have pivoted through the pandemic through an event that is super popular here in Maine. So there's so many I could tell you, but I think that's a good top 3 to share.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with the designer Roxy, I definitely can understand her situation, because I work in the fashion industry and it was heavily impacted. So I was able to see firsthand a lot of designers that definitely struggled. And I worked during New York Fashion Week for the past 14 years, always backstage producing shows and stuff like that. So to see or attending shows, so to see it come down to this is just so like, wow, because a lot of designers, they depend on New York Fashion Week or just Fashion Week in general to promote their brands, and they're making their collections, and they're going to fill the seats, and so many different people are affected. The people who rent out the venues, caterers, they're affected because they're not having physical live shows. And, it just went to a stream. You forget how many people are impacted due to just one thing changing, the models, everyone. So it was just like, to just see it come down to maybe just a virtual show it was really, really sad. And one of the clients that I was working for, we shut down our studios in March. And then just in September on the 10th, we found out that they filed for bankruptcy, and they're not even opening back up. And we were supposed to start back working. And I'm like, you know what? It just lets me know, like, go into your purpose. Cause that's what this podcast is about. This podcast is about uplifting people and just knowing, like, even though some things just snowball and hit you, like, you can get through it. You can, push through it, and, living in your purpose, finding your happiness throughout with no matter what comes at you. So like I definitely
Right.
understand where Roxy's situation, but I know that there's so many, like with all of these people, we're all gonna like go to a whole nother level. It just lets you, it brings you to a place of just reorganizing in your head. Okay, how can I go through this? Because if this had never happened, you might have never did your podcast, which is something that's so needed for these makers. And
Right.
so it's just like it transitioned us into these whole other situations. And like she was able to benefit while making the masks and help out people. So it's just like it's so interconnected of different avenues of where like things that should have been like a complete downfall, there's a light at the end of the tunnel for something. you
Oh,
know
yes, definitely. I
yeah
feel like that's what this podcast is all about. It's really just to
yeah
keep everybody afloat, keep them positive, keep them uplifted. And I find that has been a lot of engagement through just my social media channels and just through email, just people being like, keep doing what you're doing because this is the best thing that's happening, right now with like everything in the back of my head about all the challenges that COVID has made, that these stories are super fabulous and I'm glad to be a part of it.
Exactly. So, do you only help out people in Maine, or at one point will the podcast be able to help makers in different states or small businesses from other areas, or is it just Maine based?
So right now it's just Maine focused.
Okay.
But my future goal is to do a Made in New England podcast.
Okay.
And also a Made in USA podcast.
Oh, I love
There
it.
are so many fabulous makers out there.
Right.
I find that there's some other great states such as Vermont, Tennessee, California. It's just amazing. I'm like, man, people really need to focus on these guys because I don't get to hear about them all that much. Like I hear them through grassroots marketing, just from other people. And so yes, there are definitely future plans for that.
Okay.
But definitely sticking to Maine for right now.
Okay, I get it. I totally get it. And what you said also is so true, because I would have never thought about the makers of an axe maker. Like that's like I don't know how, like I know that they're made, but you just don't think of, I guess because we just me just so caught up in mass production, you don't think about there's actually a person who specifically makes axes. So
Oh, I know. It's crazy. I was in awe too when I heard about it. I was like, really? Axe making? What?
Right, exactly.
And I'm about to interview another gentleman who, so it's a family ran business, and the company is called Shaw and Tenney. It's based out of Orono, and they handcraft paddles. So paddles of all sorts, like canoes, stand-up paddle boards, kayaks. So that'll be a very interesting one too.
Very
it's just really interesting to hear like these unique products that are being handmade here in Maine, and then even like there's some great makers outside of Maine that do that too.
Right. No, I love it. Oh my gosh, so this was so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, your story, your own personal story, and being a resource for these small businesses, and like such a great help for people. And now, we know that you're there and people are going to be listening, and hopefully that these people, they have websites, and now it's going to reach so many other people who they can, help these small businesses become big businesses very soon. So this is amazing.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I really hope it continues to grow. You can follow along with just makersofme.com and on any podcast channel that's out there, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify. But yeah, I really hope so. And I'm actually going to be on Good Morning America October 12th to talk about my story too. So I'm very excited about that.
Congratulations. That's so amazing. Congrats. Yeah, so everyone, you make sure you tune into the her podcast, and you get out there and Instagram, Makers of Maine is on Instagram as well, correct?
Yes, it is. Okay. And Facebook.
Okay, and Facebook. So get out there, follow Kristan, and get out, just See what's out there. Thank
you so much, Tanya.
You're welcome.